Okay, well, today, let's remind ourselves of where we are and what we're trying to analyze. I have said that the main question in this course is, how does language relate to reality? And the short answer is it relates because people so relate it in the intentional performance of speech acts. But that only forces back the question, yes, and how does that work? How does the speech act work? And we're going to spend a fair amount of time answering that question. But you ought always to be struck by the apparently miraculous character of language. And as I told you last time, philosophy really, it's characteristic of philosophers that they are astounded by what any sane person takes for granted. And we ought to be astounded by the fact that we do all these remarkable things just by making noises through our mouths or marks on blackboards or on paper. And the basic idea is that those represent reality because of people's intentions, because people intentionally perform speech acts. But if that's right, then this is the target of our analysis. The target of our analysis is a speech act that has a structure of an illocutionary force together with a propositional content. Most of traditional philosophy of language is about this inside here, and we'll get inside it. It's a real swamp, I'll tell you, but right now we're still having a good time out here with these illocutionary force indicators. And the question I'm going to ask today is, well, how many different kinds of these things are there? I mean, if you start listing verbs in English, like assert, state, question, command, order, promise, vow, threat, pledge, apologize, thank, congratulate, and so on, you can get quite a long list. Austin claimed he got 1,000. I don't really believe it. I think he put in a lot of stuff like intend and wish, which are not really illocutionary verbs. They name intentional states. It's true you can use them to perform a speech act. You say, I wish you wouldn't do that, and that's just just an autobiographical remark, but it's normally taken as a request. That's an indirect speech act. But that doesn't make wishing itself into a speech act. So we're going to have to get to and this is going to occupy some time, the relation between this thing, which is a mental state, where you have a state type, a psychological state, belief, hope, fear, desire, love, hate, disgust, shame, all of those over here, and how they relate to assert, state, question, command, all of these things over here. Our question today, to repeat, is how many of these guys are there? How many different kinds of things are there? And that really is the same question as how many different uses of language are there. And I want to begin with a skeptical answer to the possibility, a skeptical doubt to the possibility of answering the question, and this is in Wittgenstein's Philosophical Investigations, paragraph 23. But how many kinds of sentence are there? That's German, Satz is the translation there. How many kinds of Satz are there? Say assertion, question, and command. There are countless kinds, says Wittgenstein. Unzählige, numberless kinds. Countless different kinds of use of what we call symbols, words, sentences. And this multiplicity is not something fixed, given once for all, but new types of language. New language games, as we say, come into existence, and others become obsolete and get forgotten. We can get a rough picture of this from changes in mathematics. Here the term language game is meant to bring into prominence the fact that speaking a language is part of an activity or of a form of life. Review the multiplicity of language games in the following examples and in others. Giving orders and obeying them, describing the appearance of an object or giving its measurements, constructing an object from a description or a drawing, reporting an event, speculating about an event, forming and testing a hypothesis, presenting the results of an experiment in tables and diagrams, making up a story and reading it, play acting, singing catches, guessing riddles, making a joke and telling it, solving a problem in practical arithmetic, translating from one language into another, asking, thanking, cursing, greeting, praying. It's interesting to compare the multiplicity of the tools in language, the ways they're used, the multiplicity of kinds of words and sentence, with what logicians have said about the structure of language, including the author of the Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus. That was Wittgenstein's first book. Now, I appreciate this passage, and he does call attention to the enormous variety that we find in language, and we have to respect that variety. But there is a skeptical implication in the passage that I want to reject, and that is a skeptical implication that somehow or other we can't do a rational classification of the different uses of language. I think we can. And Wittgenstein seems to me as if it's as if he said, look, you can't really classify animals because there are countless kinds of animals. Think not just of cocker spaniels and zebras, but think of teddy bears and glass menageries and stuffed animals and so on. Well, okay, you got a problem about stuffed animals and teddy bears, but all the same, we can do a rational classification of animals, and I'm going to say we can do a rational classification of those things, provided we make our question more precise. Our question is not just how many things can you do with language. You can do all kinds of things, sing operas and gargle and do all the stuff that he talks about there. But how many kinds of these are there? How many kinds of illocutionary force are there? And that means we're going to leave out a whole lot of things we'll have to talk about later, like fiction, for example, and metaphor, and other cases where we're operating on a different dimension from the illocutionary force dimension. All right, now if we're going to do that, we're going to ask that question, how many types of illocutionary force are there? We have to ask first, well, what are the components of illocutionary force? What are the things that go to make up an illocutionary force? And that's the same as the question, how many things do you have to understand? Can you hear me? You can hear me. All right, I have to hold the damn thing up. It's rather primitive technology if I have to go through. Maybe I'll find a way to attach it to my nose or my tooth or something. But anyway, for the moment, here's how it goes. What do I know when I know that somebody was apologizing rather than boasting, that he was making a prediction rather than making a promise? I said last time that it's characteristic of these things that you have to intend to perform them in order to really be performing them. But often it's hard to figure out people's intentions. There's a famous passage in Dickens, I think it's in the Pickwick Papers, where Mr. Pickwick, who is not very clear at expressing himself, is telling his cleaning lady that he wants to hire a handyman. She thinks he's proposing marriage. So he says in a sort of pompous way, I think you need a man around the house. Oh, Mr. Pickwick, she says, thinking that this is a marriage proposal. No, you need a man to help you out around the house. She says, oh, Mr. Pickwick, and so on, and it goes on. And eventually they wind up in court, and she pleads breach of promise, which is a kind of an archaic a court case. But anyway, she pleads that he promised to marry her and then didn't marry her. We know that he never made any such a promise because we're speech act theorists and we know how the story goes. All the same, he loses the case. He is held responsible for performing a speech act that he didn't actually perform. Okay, so I'm going to first begin by listing the components of the F. What sorts of different things can distinguish one speech act from another? What do we care about when we care that one speech act is of one kind rather than another? And of course, that's relative to our interests. If you're madly in love with Sally, then you're interested in dividing language into those speech acts that are about Sally and those that aren't. That's not interesting to us. We just want to know what are the components of illocutionary force, and I'm just going to list them. The most important component I call the illocutionary point, or the purpose of the type of speech act. Now let me make that clear. if somebody makes a promise, he might make a promise for all kinds of reasons, because it seemed like it was the way to keep the conversation going, or the person he was talking to clearly expected him to make a promise. But what purpose does it serve in virtue of the fact that it's a promise? That's the question we're asking. What is its point in virtue of being a speech act of that type? And there, it seems to me, we can answer that quite clearly. The point of a promise is to undertake an obligation on the part of the speaker. The speaker undertakes an obligation normally to the hearer, and normally for the benefit of the hearer. I can't promise to punch you in the nose or pour cold water on you unless for some reason you want to be punched in the nose or have cold water poured on you. So the point or purpose is the point or purpose in virtue of being a speech act of that type. It's essential to something's being an apology that it's an expression of sorrow or regret, even if it's insincere. It's essential to something's being an assertion that it's a commitment to how things are in the world, and so on through the other types of speech act. So illocutionary point or purpose, I'll put in the modifier here, the illocutionary point or purpose. But now we saw briefly that speech acts have different ways of relating to reality. The whole idea of assertions and descriptions and explanations is they're supposed to match how things are in the world. They have the word-to-world direction of fit, where the point of orders and promises is not to match an independently existing reality, but to make it clear how we want reality to come to be, or how we intend to make it be, as in the case of intentions. So that we get these different directions of fit. We get the word-to-world characteristic of statements and descriptions, and you get the world-to-word characteristic of orders, commands, promises, and vows. And then you get these odd cases where you presuppose a fit, where I apologize for doing something, I apologize for stepping on your foot, and there I simply presuppose a fit. Now, this is very interesting, and we're going to get more of these later on, but I want you to see that we fit language to reality in different ways. Now, there's a third essential feature of the speech act, and that is that whenever you perform one of these, you express a psychological state that has this structure. So whenever you make a statement, you express a belief. Whenever you give an order, you express a desire. Whenever you make a promise, you express an intention. And that's true, I think, of all cases where you perform these. You express one of those, and that is the sincerity condition on the speech act. And I'll just call that as the expressed psychological state. And when you read speech acts, you'll see this is what I call a sincerity condition, and this is the essential condition. Now, when I wrote the book, I didn't really understand direction of fit. I should have put it in, but I didn't understand it well enough at that time. But so we've got these conditions on the Speech Act, and they're going to give us an important set of tools for classifying different kinds of speech acts, for getting a sort of reasoned taxonomy. Now, why are we doing that? Well, there are two parts to our analysis of this thing. One is what you might call a horizontal analysis, where I give you a sort of geography of language. I give you different ways in which you can get a map of discourse, a map of speech that people perform. But later on, we're going to have to dig deeper. We're going to have to do not a horizontal analysis, but a vertical analysis. How is this thing embedded in the mind and in utterances? How do you get from the sound to the illocutionary act? That's a tougher question, and we'll get to that. But right now, we're doing a geography and geology. Later on, we'll get deeper. All right, and our answer is, how can we give a map? How can we give a classification of different kinds of speech acts. And these, I'm going to suggest, are the most important features for classifying speech acts. And I'm directly answering Wittgenstein there, who says, well, you can't really do it because there are an infinite number, or as he says, he's usually quoted as saying it's an infinite number, but he, strictly speaking, doesn't say infinite. He says numberless. And I think by that he means you can't count. It's unzählige, and rather than infinite. Okay, but now there are a bunch of other factors. One is there's the force or strength with which the utterance is performed, with which the illocutionary point is presented in the ordinary non-technical sense of force or strength. For example, we all hear the difference between, I say to you, did you eat the cookies? And you say, well, I don't think I did. That's different from, I solemnly swear on the memory of my dead ancestors that I did not eat the cookies. It's the same propositional content and the same illocutionary point, but it's presented with much deeper strength, much greater strength. And you can do this with all kinds of ways. You can say, I want you to leave the room as a request, and you can say, you're going to leave the room, or else. And there you see it's the same. You're presenting a directive, and indirectly in the first case, where you say, I want you to. But the illocutionary point is presented with different force or strength. Now, that's not the same as the fifth feature, and that is the position of the speaker and the hearer as it relates to the illocutionary force. So the same utterance will be interpreted differently. If I say, I want you to read such and such a chapter in a book, that is a direction. That's a requirement of the course. Whereas if somebody else tells you, gee, it sure would be nice if you read that chapter, that's not an authorized order. He or she is not in the position to tell you what you ought to read, and that has to do with the position of the speaker and the hearer. If I say I excommunicate you, you don't have to worry because I'm not authorized to excommunicate anybody. If the Pope says it, I don't know what the Pope has to do to excommunicate somebody, but suppose he does all the rules, he's got the committees going and all that type of stuff. And he says, I hereby excommunicate you, then you get then you're in worse shape because he has the authority that I don't have. He's in a position which I'm not in. And the position of the speaker and the hearer typically will bear on the performance of the speech act. Now, sometimes, indeed, the position requires that you do it in a very special way. I have an artillery handbook of the French Army from 1834. And when you first read it, you think it's ridiculous because it's the military mentality. These guys make explicit things you don't need to make explicit. So it says, to make the firing begin, the captain says, begin the firing. And to make the firing stop, the captain says, cease firing. And you think, well, that's kind of dumb. You know, pour faire commencer le feu, le capitaine dit commencer le feu. Et pour faire cesser le feu, le capitaine dit cesser le feu. But it occurred to me, it's not really so dumb to make it fully explicit. What you don't want is some hyper-sophisticated captain who can't bear to say things literally and crassly. So instead of saying cease firing, he says things like, fellas, don't you know when enough is enough? I mean, ça suffit. You don't want that. And people are dying all around. There's a lot of racket, blood, and noise. You want everything to be totally explicit. So this is why often it's important for the person in authority not just to say anything, but to have an explicit formula. And indeed, when the United States Congress declares war, if you look it up, you'll find they always use the same form of words. Now, the Constitution doesn't require that they use the same form of words, but after a while, it becomes unambiguous. Everybody knows what it is. I assume what they do is they tell some secretary to go look it up, and then they copy it out from the last time they declared war. But the point is there are certain standard things that are used. So the reason the Pope can excommunicate you and I can't is not because he speaks better English or Italian or Latin than I do. No doubt he does. But rather it's because he has this position of authority that I don't have. Okay, well, let's list some other features. There's another dimension, and that is how the Speech Act relates to the interests of the speaker and the hearer. So we all understand the difference between boasting and complaining, between me saying congratulations on your marriage to Bill and me saying my condolences on your marriage to Bill. Same propositional content, you're getting married to Bill, but I give different expression because I assume one is in your interest and the other is not in your interest. Now that also leads to another consideration, and that is how the Speech Act relates to the other speech acts in the discourse. And we have a lot of verbs for marking that. Things like I deduce, I conclude, I infer, I object. All of those relate the utterance that follows to the rest of the surrounding discourse. You conclude from the evidentiary basis, and not just the discourse, but from the rest of the context. Or you infer from what somebody said that such and such is the case. So reply, deduce, conclude, infer, all of those are ways of relating the utterance to the rest of the discourse and the surrounding propositional content. Now, there is another feature that's worth remarking on, and that is sometimes the F component, this guy out here, reaches inside and affects the propositional content as determined by or as affected by the illocutionary force. So if I make a prediction, it has to be a prediction about the future. It can't be a prediction about what happened in 500 BC. If I make a promise, it has to be some future course of action of myself. I can't say, I promise you that Barack Obama will keep your taxes low, because it's not, he can promise you that, but I can't promise you that, or maybe he could promise to try to keep your taxes low. If you promise something, it has to be something you can do. Now, if the mother says to the piano teacher, Johnny will be on, I promise you Johnny will be on time for his piano lesson next week, what she means is, I promise to see to it that he will be on time. All of these are cases where the illocutionary force reaches inside and affects the propositional content. Now, there's another distinction I made, and I'm not sure it's quite right, but anyway, let me put a question mark next to it. And that is the utterance necessarily a speech act, or can you do the same thing without a speech act? So, for example, I suggested, I'm not sure this is right, that often you can conclude or deduce or infer without actually saying anything, or without even internally performing a speech act. I'm not sure that's right. I'm sitting in an airplane, and I conclude that the guy sitting next to me is drunk. Now, I don't have to say, sir, I conclude that you are drunk. No, I better not do that. I might get in trouble. But do I have to say something to myself, at least, in order to conclude that he's drunk? I say in the assigned reading that you don't have to say anything, but I'm not sure that's right. If I conclude or infer, it looks like some mental speech act, some internal speech act of some kind or another has to be performed. Anyway, so put a question mark next to that. Now, a 10th feature that I have is, does it require an extra-linguistic institution. Some speech acts do require an institution that goes outside of language. And this is a yes-no. Do you need an extra-linguistic institution? In order to give and bequeath my property, I have to be a property owner. In order to adjourn the meeting, there has to be an institution of meetings and of Robert's Rules of Order or some such. Now, you might think, well, these really are related to each other. The position of the speaker and the hearer, the force or strength, and the extra-linguistic institution. Remember, I said, well, a pope has a position that enables him to excommunicate you, or the President of the United States has a position that enables him to do things that you and I can't do. And isn't that the same, really, as the institution? I don't think so, because there are lots of cases where you have a position of a non-institutional kind. So if the guy goes in the bank and points a gun at everybody and says, okay, everybody hands up, this is a robbery, then he's ordering you to raise your hands. He's not suggesting it or putting it forward as a possibility for discussion. It's really an order. But that's not because we got this old American tradition of bank robberies and he's operating within the institution. No, it's because he's got a gun. That is, the brute physical force will give him the possibility of having a stronger position, even though the stronger position isn't defined institutionally. Okay, well, let me mention just a couple of other these. One other one that interests me is, what are we up to? 11. Is there a performative verb or not for that type of speech act? And remember, I said there are certain types of speech acts that really you can perform even though there is no performative use of the verb. You can't hint or insinuate by saying, I hereby hint or I hereby insinuate. And there are others like that. I don't think you can threaten by saying, I threaten. And you can't boast by saying, I boast. I boast that I got a new Harley Davidson. That sounds funny to me. It sounds all right if you embed it. If you say, look, Bill, let me boast a little bit about my new Harley. Then it's okay if you embed it. But just to come out flatly and say, I hereby boast that I have a new Harley, that doesn't sound like good English to me. And maybe it's because boast and threatening, like hinting and insinuating, have to have some degree of concealment, of implicitness, that they can't be fully explicit. Finally, and I'm not saying this list is complete, but it's what I could think up of on an afternoon when I worked on this. I had to give a lecture to the Linguistic Society of America, and I thought, well, what the hell, let's give a classification of speech acts. So I thought up all of these different features, but maybe you can think of others. And the final one, I got up to 12 and then ran out of gas. There are verbs that have to do with the style of the performance of the speech act. And one of my favorites here is announce. You see, any illocutionary point can be announced, but announcing means performing the speech act to the general public. So universities will typically have bulletin boards where it says at the top, announcements. Now, I think just about any kind of speech act can go on the announcements. The chancellor apologizes that the fees are going up. The police department apologized for beating up so many demonstrators. The philosophy department orders that all philosophy majors complete the requirements by such and such a time. So it looks like announcements don't restrict the illocutionary point. They have to do with the style of performance, and that's opposed to confiding, because if I confide in you, that suggests it's not a general announcement that is something confidential between you and me. This is why those advertisements on television are slightly, well, not just slightly, they're totally absurd. Gillette Razor wishes to tell you confidentially that they now have a brand new thing that will chop all your beard off or whatever, and that's not confidential. They're not confiding that to you. Okay, so this is what I came up with as the 12 features that come out most obviously. Now, what I'm going to do is use these three: point, fit, and sincerity condition to give you a basic classification of speech acts. And basically, I'm going to make a very strong claim. In this line of business, in the illocutionary line of business, there's not an infinite number of things you can do. There's not an unzählige number. There's a very limited number of things that you can do. And furthermore, it follows from the nature of language itself that there are only a restricted number of things that you can do. That is, every philosopher who's brought up in our tradition feels if you've got categories, at some point you owe us a justification of the categories. You owe us a transcendental deduction of the categories. I shudder when I hear that, when I utter that Kantian expression, but that's what I'm going to do later on. Now I'm going to give you the categories. Later on, I got to show you why it has to be like that, why the nature of meaning itself determines that these are the categories. Okay, now I'm going to stop for questions, because now comes the meat of this lecture. Can I erase some of this stuff? Yeah, I'll erase this last two, because I'm going to put on my categories right now. Any questions so far about these features? Anybody? Everybody's up with this. Yes, did you have your hand up? Yeah, the point is there are certain speech acts you can only perform if there is an extra-linguistic institution and you are occupying a position in that institution. So if the guy says to you, you are under arrest in the name of the legal authority of Alameda County, I arrest you. That is a speech act that can only be performed if there's a certain institution and you occupy a certain position in that institution. If I walk up to some guy on the street and say, I hereby arrest you, that's not going to work, right? Now, there is such a thing as a citizen's arrest. I never understood it, but maybe somebody, those of you who are pre-law students can figure it out. But the point is, there are lots of institutions that you perform, and we accept these quite unconsciously. We don't have a problem. You would be surprised how people accept instructions from the police. There was a person who was harassing me not long ago, and I didn't want to call the cops. Okay, she had problems. But when the police, somebody else called the police, and she was sitting in my car and wouldn't leave. And I mean, I won't tell you the whole horrible story, but in any case, she suffered from various fantasies. And when the police came, I noticed everybody did what the police said. It's my car. The policeman told me, get out of the car and go stand over there. I did. I accepted the guy's. I didn't say some instinct wanted me to say, look, it's my goddamn car. If I want to sit in the driver's seat of my car, I can. Oh, the cop says I do this, so I did it. So people will accept authority, even people who pride themselves on their independence. And this is a case where the force of the Speech Act depends on the position of authority that the person occupies. Yes?
So then it's not like kind of similar to 5?
Okay, now let me make this clear. I said it, but I didn't say it very clearly. The extra-linguistic institution, that is number 10, is often a source of the position of the speaker and the hearer. But it's not the only source. There can be the position of the speaker and the hearer where it's just based on brute force. That was the point of my bank robber example. The bank robber who tells you, hands up, is not making a suggestion, he's issuing an order. And what makes it an order is not that he doesn't say, I am the official bank robber in this particular scene, and I am, as the officially appointed and authorized bank robber, I hereby instruct you to raise your hands. That's the policeman who has a position of authority in an institution. And I was suggesting we don't have an established institution of bank robbery. We have an unfortunate practice, but it's not, you can't say, well, this is the old American tradition of the bank robbery, and we all have to do what we're supposed to do. Now, people have these expectations, and that has to do with a background. And I'm going to tell you about that later, because that is a very important set of issues about language. Let me give you one example. It is standardly said, and I think probably correctly, that you can learn more about human beings, as we Dostoevskians would say, about the human soul. I mean, don't quote me as saying that, but as Dostoevsky would say about the human soul, from reading Dostoevsky, than you can from taking a course in psychology, right? You must have heard that before. That if you read Shakespeare and Dostoevsky, you'll understand human beings better than if you take a course in psychology. Now, I think that's probably right, but there are two things to say is, it's not a criticism of psychology as an academic discipline. That's not what they're trying to do. They're not competing with Dostoevsky. They have a different set of questions. But now there's something else important, and that is people who tell you, I know so much more from reading Dostoevsky. Well, what is it exactly that you know? That's a harder question to answer. What are you going to say? Things like, well, people are kind of complicated. Well, yeah, but I knew that before I read Dostoevsky. And yet I do want to say my life is different for having read Shakespeare, Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, Chekhov, and a whole lot of other list of required reading that I'll provide you at the end of the course. But now here's the point. I couldn't list the information that I got from them as a set of propositions. And in a sense, it isn't information. I don't say, well, here are 7 propositions you'll learn from Dostoevsky. You miss the point if you think that's what it's like. Rather, in the case of literature, by imaginatively occupying a different background, you affect your own background. Now, I have to explain that in more detail. One symptom is this. When I became obsessed as an undergraduate with Dostoevsky, and I read, roughly speaking, everything, including even the bad novels, and there are plenty of bad novels there, what I discovered was the first 50 pages, all these characters seemed to me crazy. But after about 50 pages, everybody else I knew seemed to me crazy, and these people seemed to be quite sane. Of course, you got all that money. What else would you do? You throw it in the fire, as Rogojin does in The Idiot. Well, anyway, this is not a lecture about Dostoevsky. The point I'm making now is that we have to understand the role of the background in human cognition, including human linguistic cognition, and I'll come back to that later. Okay, but anyway, those are good questions, and the question is, what's the difference between the position of the speaker here and the extra-linguistic institution? And the short answer is, often the position will derive from the institution, but not always. There are other factors at work as well. Yes? Yes. Yes. The opposite, right. Okay, it doesn't fit into this. And now there are a whole lot of things that are not listed on this particular, on the taxonomy that I'm going to give you, because they're in a different dimension. They're like, well, how do you fit stuffed animals into your classification of animals? And the answer is you don't. It's a different set of questions involved. Or how do you fit imaginary animals in fiction, like leprechauns and unicorns? How do they fit in? And again, you don't do it. You discuss them later. So I'm going to give you a taxonomy now, and then we'll talk about irony, sarcasm, fiction, and all sorts of other things that lie outside this taxonomy, which have to do with variations on elements in the taxonomy. Okay, somebody else had a hand up. Yeah. Yes, let me go over direction of fit again. It is an absolutely fundamental fact about human cognition. And I'm pretty sure that it derives from the fact that we've got a sensory nervous system and a motor nervous system, that our mental capacities have two fundamentally different ways of relating to reality. Now, there are others besides the two, but the two that are the biggest deal is your cognitive apparatus is supposed to tell you how things are. That's the mind-to-world or word-to-world direction of fit. And that's true of assertions, statements, perceptions, memories, beliefs. The rough and ready test, anything that can be true or false, has the downhill or word-to-world or mind-to-world direction of fit. But also there's another direction of fit where the cognitive apparatus is not supposed to tell you how things are, but how you want them to be or how you intend to make them be. And that's the case of desires and intentions, but also in language, it's the case with orders, commands, promises, vows, threats, pledges. Do you follow me? Okay, now it gets more complicated for reasons I'm going to explain to you when you get into the emotions. And the emotions are kind of a bitch, actually, to speak metaphorically. And it's a scandal that nobody's got a decent theory of the emotions, and maybe I'll get into them, though this isn't really a course about the mind. They do relate very importantly to language. Okay, but I want you to understand these two directions of fit. There's a whole class of speech acts. Indeed, in heavily theoretical societies like our own, they're the ones that are regarded as the most important. And those are the ones that are supposed to be true or false, that represent how things are. That's most of what you acquire when you go to the university is a set of propositions with a downhill or word-to-world direction of fit, propositions that are supposed to be true. But there are the other classes of propositions presented in orders, vows, promises, threats, commands, requests, and praying and pleading, which are not supposed to be true or false, but supposed to represent how you intend to make things be in the case of a promise, or how you want somebody else to make them be in the case of an order or a request. You got it now? Yeah, okay. All right, well, let's do it. I mean, let's answer the question, how many types of speech act are there? And here goes. The first class I call assertives. Now, when I first wrote this, I call them representatives, but I think in later publications I call them assertives. And now we're going to go through these three features: point, fit, and psychological state. The illocutionary point of the assertive class is to represent how things are in the world, or alternatively, to commit the speaker to the proposition or to the view that the propositional content represents accurately the state of affairs in the world. So if I say Barack Obama is president, or 2 + 2 = 4, those are assertives, and they commit me to truth. The assertive commits you to the truth of the proposition, and that's because the assertive is supposed to represent how things are. Now let's introduce a symbolism. This little gate symbol called the assertion sign was invented by Frege, and I'm going to use it to mark assertion. So all assertives have this assertion sign in front of them. The direction of fit is always downhill. It is word to world. And remember, the mark is these can be true or false. And the expressed sincerity condition of the assertive is always belief, and any proposition can be assertive. So we just put it, the propositional content generally can be of the form P. Now notice when I say it is a commitment, the commitment can vary enormously. There's a difference between making a solemn assertion and putting something forward as a hypothesis, between saying, I'm absolutely certain it's going to rain, and saying, well, I think it's going to rain. And then there you will be, in these two cases, have different degrees of commitment. So belief here marks a range rather than specifically a belief. It includes supposing, thinking something is probably true or might be true, but it seems to me clear. Putting something forward as a hypothesis is quite is like asserting in a way that it's not like promising or ordering. Verbs that name assertives are, well, the philosopher's favorite statement, state, as well as assert, describe, characterize, classify, and no doubt others. Okay, so I won't write all those verbs down because I think it's pretty clear what's going on here. All right, now the second class I call directives, and the defining illocutionary point of the directive is that it always counts as an attempt by the speaker to get the hearer to do something. It is the only type of speech act defined in terms of an intended perlocutionary effect. You notice the assertives typically are designed to convince people or persuade people, but it's not part of the definition. I can make a statement and not give a damn whether or not you believe me. But if I give you an order, even if I don't care if you obey it, the giving of the order counts as an attempt to get you to do it. So the directive is an attempt by the speaker to get the hearer to do something, that which is specified in the propositional content. We use the shriek mark to mark the illocutionary point. The direction of fit is world to words. That is, the world is supposed to change to match the words. The sincerity condition is always desire. When you issue the speech act, you express the desire that the person should do the thing you are ordering him or her to do. And the propositional content is always that the hearer does some future voluntary act A. The hearer does future voluntary A. Now let's go through that. If I issue you an order, it has to be something that you can do. I can't order you that somebody else should do something. I might order you to see to it that they do it, but then that's you who's supposed to be carrying out the order. And it has to be some voluntary act. I can't, it's okay for me to say, look, I try to be more like President Eisenhower, but it won't do for me to say things like, well, resemble Eisenhower or look like Eisenhower, because it's not a future, it's not something you can voluntarily do. An order has to be something you can voluntarily carry out. Now, the verbs that name direct as well, the philosopher's favorites, are order and command, but there's also request and suggest and plead and beg and pray. And notice, incidentally, that suggest and insist can take different illocutionary points. I can both suggest that something is the case, and I can insist that you do something. I can suggest and insist both as assertives and as directives. Okay, so we've got the illocutionary point, the direction of fit, the sincerity condition, the expressed psychological state, and the propositional content of the directive is restricted. It is restricted to some future course of action of the hearer. Notice it can be a negative action, stop smoking, or it can be a mental action, do the 12 times 12 tables in your head, but it has to be some future form of behavior on the part of the hearer. Now, you might say, well, why do we care about these damned psychological states? Aren't they just sort of an accompaniment? And the answer is they are internal to the speech act, and you can see that by an interesting logical property. It doesn't make sense. It's not self-contradictory, but it doesn't make sense to perform the speech act and deny the presence of the psychological state. You can't say, Barack Obama's president, but I don't believe he's president. I order you to leave the room, but I don't want you to leave the room. I promise to come and see you, but I don't intend to come and see you. I apologize for stepping on your face, but I'm not one damn bit sorry that I stepped on your face. I thank you for giving me the money, but I'm not grateful. I congratulate you on winning the race, but I'm not glad you won the race. Now, notice it's perfectly consistent to suppose that I apologize for something that I'm not sorry about, that I congratulate you on something I'm not glad about, that I assert something I don't believe. Indeed, that's the mark of sincerity and insincerity. The insincere apology is one where you apologize for something you're not really sorry for. But what you cannot do is conjoin the performance of the Speech Act with the denial of the sincerity condition, because the performance of the Speech Act is automatically an expression of that sincerity condition. You are expressing sorrow, gratitude, and so on when you perform the Speech Act, and that's shown by the fact that you can't consistently perform the Speech Act and deny the sincerity condition, even though there's no logical absurdity in supposing that you performed the Speech Act and that you didn't satisfy the sincerity condition. Does everybody see that? The sincerity condition is internal to the performance of the Speech Act, even though, of course, the Speech Act can be performed even without the presence of the sincerity condition, and that's what makes it sincere or insincere. It's insincere if you express an intentional state that you don't in fact have. Now, this has a history. In one version, one form of it is called Moore's paradox. Moore was struck by the fact that the hypothesis that it's raining is quite independent of the hypothesis that I believe that it's raining. So why can't I say it's raining, but I don't believe that it's raining? Why is that weird to say that? And he never got a satisfactory answer, but I'm giving you the answer. The answer is when you make an assertion, you are expressing the sincerity condition. Now notice an interesting counterexample to that, and that is if you change your tone of voice, you can adopt, so to speak, a different persona. The lieutenant who says, "Men, it's my duty. I order you to charge up that hill. But frankly, I don't want you to do it because you'll all get killed." Now, that's a case of the guy who is, as the lieutenant, is giving you the order, but as your buddy, as your friend, he is dissociating himself from the order. If the stewardess says, "We will be landing on time," and then adds, "But frankly, I don't believe it," well, she won't keep her job very long as stewardess, but the point is there what she's doing is dissociating herself from the performance of the Speech Act. I think there are cases like that where you wear two different hats, where you perform a Speech Act, but at the same time you can deny the correlated intentional state by, as it were, dissociating yourself from the performance of the Speech Act. Okay, any questions, other questions? Yeah. Right. Okay. There are all sorts of ambiguous characteristics, and English is very good about allowing you to distinguish these cases where you say, well, I'm not in a position to make a flat assertion, but I can at least suggest something as a likely possibility. Philosophers do this kind of crap a lot because they don't want to be caught off base. And some authors are so refined. Henry James was once, a reviewer of Henry James once says, Mr. James stated that such and such, and James was appalled. How could you possibly think I would do anything so crude as to state? I mean, James never stated anything. He beat around the bush for several chapters. His characters generally have about 18 motives for my one, and then it turns out they don't actually do anything on any of these motives. So there are different degrees of refinement and ambiguity, but all the same, what we're being ambiguous about, or what we're being refined about, are the different degrees of commitment involved in the presentation of this illocutionary point. I once reviewed a book by Francis Crick, in which I said Crick put forward the following view, and it's false. I mean, the view was that consciousness is caused by variable rates of neuron firing in the thalamocortical system of 40 to 60 hertz. And he agreed with me that it was false. But what appalled him is I said that I asserted this. He said, I just put it forward as a tentative hypothesis. Oh, okay, a tentative hypothesis. Sounds to me like an assertive, though admittedly it's a weaker one. So there are all kinds of variations, refinements, and ambiguities in these cases. Okay, the next class, and here I just use Austin's word, I call commissives. And the defining illocutionary point of the commissive is that it commits the speaker, again in varying degrees, to some future course of action. The philosopher's favorite is a promise, and the promise commits you to doing something normally for the benefit of the hearer, but not all commissives are for the benefit of the hearer. If I give you a threat, that's not for your benefit, it's for your disbenefit, it's for your harm. Okay, as with directives, the commissive has the uphill or word-to-word direction of fit. The characteristic or the internal sincerity condition on the commissive is intention. The speaker expresses an intention to do something, and the intention it always is that the speaker does some future voluntary act A. So I can promise you that I will do something next week, but I can't promise you that I will do something last year. It has to be some future act, some future voluntary act. Again, the philosopher, I'll take a question in a second. The philosopher's favorite commissive, the all-time favorite, is promising. And there's a huge literature about promising. Even I have written about promising. There's an oddity here, and that is promising is a favorite of English language and German language philosophers. But as far as I know, the French and the Italians don't give a damn about promising. What's Descartes' theory of promising? I doubt if he had one. But Kant, yeah, I can tell you about Kant or G.E. Moore or me or whole lots of other people. Now, what is it about the English language and German language philosophers that leads them to have an obsession with promising, which is not characteristic of other European languages, particularly the Romance languages, such as Spanish, French, and Italian? It must have something to do with Protestantism. I mean, Protestants are more obsessed with promising than Catholics are. But that's the only, I mean, if you can figure it out, let me know. But in any case, I have a theory of promising, and it's very common to write about promising in English or German. Promise is the favorite commissive, but there are lots of others as well. Vow, threat, pledge, contract, and warranty, and guarantee. When I was working on this, I wondered what's the difference between a warranty and a guarantee. As far as I can tell, there isn't any difference. A warranty just is the same as a guarantee. I'll take a question in a second. I want to do this. I go through these cases first. Okay, so it's clear what's going on in the case of commissives and how they differ from directives. Now, I got in trouble once. I gave a lecture on this kind of stuff at Notre Dame, and it's a Catholic university, and somebody in the audience asked me, well, what's a prayer? And I said, well, it's a directive. Give us this day our daily bread. Well, it was a near riot. The point is, you don't give orders to God, you see, and give us this day our daily bread is not an order. It does not, you couldn't say, give us this day our daily bread or else. Or give us this day our daily bread or I'll get you. I mean, that's not going to wash. So later on I'll tell you what a prayer is. It's an expressive. But anyway, we all make mistakes, and this one was pointed out very forcibly. Okay, there were a bunch of hands up. Let me take them. Yeah. 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 Not something you're going to do. Promise in English is the favorite verb for committing yourself. And people often use promise with assertives. Things like, look, it's going to rain. I promise you it's going to rain. Now, in the Bay Area, it's more like this. Europeans come here and they look at the clouds in July and they think it's certainly going to rain. And you tell them, no, this is the Bay Area. That's a high fog. It's not going to rain on July 17th. And then they come, I look at these clouds. I say, I promise you it's not going to rain. Now, that's an assertive. It's not a commissive. But we use promise metaphorically because it means pro mise. I place myself forward. We use it to mark the force of the commitment. Okay, first her, then you, then him. You're next. Yeah, commissive. The symbol is C. I couldn't think of a sexier symbol. It's E. Frega, I stole from the assertion sign, and the shriek mark is kind of obvious. In Spanish they use it to mark the illocutionary point of the directive, but C is for commissive. And then the uphill direction of fit, intention is the expressed psychological state. Yeah. Okay, next question was you. Yeah. Okay, I'm getting to that, but let me go over it. Questions are a species of directive, and they're always, as I said last time, directives to answer the question, where the form of the question determines the form of the answer. I should have said that again, but let me make it fully explicit. The question directives have questions as an important subclass, where the question is always to perform a speech act, where with this odd exception of the English modal auxiliary verbs, the form of the answer is determined by the form of the question. If I say, do you have any bananas? And you say yes, that means yes, we have bananas, not yes, it's a fine day, or yes, Obama is president, because the form of the question determines the form of the answer. And the only exceptions I can think of are the English modals, where if I say, should I marry Sally? The answer is not yes, you should, but yes, do. You can use an imperative, or no, don't. The question invites the imperative in that case. But questions are all directives. They are directives to fill in the value of a propositional variable, of a propositional function. The yes/no question asks you to assert or deny a proposition. Was Sally at the party? Answer yes, answer no. The answer is given by making an assertion. How many people were at the party? There the form is X number of people were at the party, question mark, and the direction is fill in the value of X, state the value of X. Now in speech acts, there's an idiotic mistake where I say, all questions are requests for assertives. And I think I may have just said that a few minutes ago, but it's wrong. When the book was in the press, a small boy said to me, do you promise to take us skiing this weekend? And my heart sank. It was too late to correct the text, but he had just requested a promise, right? Because the answer to his question is either make the promise or refuse to make the promise, but it's not give him some information. What he wants is a commitment or a denial of what I call a illocutionary denegation of the commitment. We'll get to those in a second. Okay, so questions are requests for an answer, typically requests for an assertive, but other kinds of speech acts can also be the answer to a question. All right, now it gets messier. There is a big class of expressives. The defining illocutionary point of the expressive, and I'll just use E for that, is to express the psychological state in the sincerity condition. So when you congratulate somebody, you're expressing your pleasure. When you thank them, you're expressing your gratitude. When you congratulate them, and so on through these other cases. Congratulating, thanking, welcoming, all of those are cases where you express, the whole illocutionary point is to express the psychological state. Now, in the thing that you read, I say, well, there really isn't a direction of fit. You just take the fit for granted if you thank somebody for something. But I think that's misleading because that suggests there is no fit. What I'm trying to say is the fit is presupposed. So I'll put PRP there, and I can't think of a better symbol for it. I'll put a circle around it to mark the fact that it's a symbol. And then the psychological state expressed is a variable. You can express just about anything. And indeed, you can even express these things like desire and belief, even though the point of the speech act is not to give an order or express a belief. If you say things like, Bill, I want you to do this for me. I want you to do it for me and Cynthia and the children. That seems to me likely to be an expressive. Of course, the point will be to get the guy to go on and do it, but the whole idea is you're expressing this strong desire. And you can see that by getting similar sorts of things where it has no question with somebody's future course of action. You say, I really want the Democrats to win in November or whatever. You have some deep expressive there where the aim is to express the psychological state. And indeed, I want to say it often happens in prayer that the point of the prayer is expressive. And the Nicene Creed, it begins, we believe in God the Father Almighty. And that's an expressive. It isn't that they're reporting a piece of autobiography. You know, they're telling you about their psychological state. But they are expressing their faith. They're expressing their common faith. Okay, so expressives don't have all that many verbs that name them, but there is congratulate, thank, condole, welcome, apologize. All of those are cases of expressives. But anytime you perform the speech act, whose primary illocutionary point is to express a psychological state, then it seems to me that's an expressive. Now, what's the propositional content? Well, in the examples I gave you, it needn't be something that the speaker actually does. If I or even that you, that the hearer does, it can be something that's associated with you. So I can congratulate you if you win the race, but I can also congratulate you if your child wins the race, something you're not responsible for. All the same, it's your good fortune. On the other hand, I can't thank or congratulate you on just about anything. It has to be something that's got something to do with you. And so I put that rather lamely by saying it has to be some property, the speaker or the hearer plus some property of the speaker or the hearer. I can't congratulate you on anything, and you can't apologize for anything. I cannot congratulate you on the elliptical orbit of the planets. Congratulations, the damn things are elliptical. I could do that with Johannes Kepler because he discovered the elliptical orbit of the planets. But for the rest of you, it's not closely enough connected with you. A zillion years ago, when I was first working on this stuff, there was an interesting international crisis. And crises are always great for the study of speech acts because people have to find various mealy-mouthed things to say to reporters. Watergate was a speech act theorist's delight, where when the Nixon administration said something false, and they were pointed out its falsity at one point, they said, well, that statement is no longer operational. What does that mean? You know, as if somehow or other it was a machine and it got shut off or something broke down. But in any case, in an earlier crisis, there was a great crisis where the Soviet military shot down an American spy plane, and then there were all kinds of illocutionary forces in the air. Now, Eisenhower, then president, made a very interesting utterance. He said, I will express my regret for the spy plane, but I will not apologize. Well, hell, I had a theory that that's what apologizing was. It was expressing regret. But as usual, Eisenhower was right and I was wrong. There's a huge difference between expressing regret and apologizing. You can see this with examples. Suppose a tidal wave strikes Yucatan and wipes out the population. And the State Department sends their deepest expression of regret and condolences to the Mexican people. That's one thing. If the Defense Department issues an apology, that's something else. That means they are accepting responsibility. Oh yeah, well, we tested a few hydrogen bombs and they got out of hand and the waves got too big. So if you apologize, it's something you accept responsibility for. It's something that's bad that you accept responsibility for. Now, how much time have I got? I want to get through all of these. Oh my gosh. Well, the one that's most fun I won't have much time for, but that's this one. There are speech acts whose aim is to change reality to match the content of the speech acts. And I call them, just have a different sounding name, I call them declarations. Now, most people like to call them declaratives to match the pronunciation of the others, but they are special. Why? Because the illocutionary point of the declaration is to change reality to match the propositional content of the speech act solely by declaring reality to be changed. There's a kind of word magic almost involved in the declaration because you make something the case by saying that it is the case. Declarations have the double direction of fit. If you adjourn the meeting by saying the meeting is adjourned, you declare war by saying war is declared, you make it the case that war is declared, and thus you achieve the world-to-word direction of fit. You change the world to match the words. But you do that by representing the world as having been so changed. Does everybody see that? That in the case of the declaration, when you adjourn the meeting, pronounce somebody husband and wife, give and bequeath your watch, make somebody the chairman of the meeting, or make somebody president of the United States, all of those are cases where you change reality and thus you achieve this uphill direction of fit, but you do it by representing reality as having been so changed. Now notice you don't perform two speech acts. One speech act does both directions of fit at once. It isn't as if I said, when I make you chairman of the meeting, as if if I said, you're going to be chairman as a statement and then go and be chairman as an order. That's not it. It's a single speech act that changes reality by represents it as having been changed. Now, how do we get away with that? Well, for human beings, almost all of these, I'll show you some odd exceptions later, have to do with there being an extra-linguistic institution. You make a declaration within an extra-linguistic institution. In the text that you read, I say declarations don't have a sincerity condition. There's no way you can declare war insincerely. You just do it or you don't. But I now think that's wrong. I think they got a whole lot of sincerity conditions in the declaration. You have to intend to do it. You have to believe you're doing it. And I think you have to want to do it. If you declare war, adjourn the meeting, pronounce somebody husband and wife. So I think you got a lot of sincerity going here. But let me put a question mark next to that, that you have to have all of these. And anything can be declared as far as the logical structure is concerned, though of course in real life you can't get away with much. See, God says, let there be light, and there is light. That's a declaration, and it's not a directive or a commissive. When God said, let there be light, he didn't mean, Sam over there, turn on the damn lights. Nor did he mean, that's a directive. Nor did he mean, I promise you guys I'll make light when I get around to it. He makes it the case that there is light by declaring that there is light. Now, we can't do that. We do not have the power to create light, but we do have a similar magical power. We can create various institutional facts about human relations, just by declaring them. And I will give you an example. This lecture is now over.